shut down the internet and curtailed cellular service, plunging Egypt into digital darkness. Despite the shutdown, as media activist C.W. Anderson said on Democracy Now!, people make revolutions, not technology. The demands were chanted through the streets for democracy, for self-determination. The hated Interior Ministry security forces, the black-shirted police loyal to Hosni Mubarak, were beating and killing people, arresting journalists, smashing and confiscating cameras. On Saturday morning, Sharif goes to Tahrir Square. Despite the SMS and internet blackout, a talented journalist and technical whiz, Sharif figured out the technical workaround, was soon tweeting out of Tahrir. Amazing scene. 3 tanks roll by with a crowd of people riding atop each one, chanting Hosni Mubarak out. Egypt is the second largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid for decades after Israel, not counting the funds expended on the wars and occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan. Mubarak's regime has received roughly $2 billion a year for the past 30 years, overwhelmingly for the military. Where has the money gone? Mostly to U.S. corporations. I asked Bill Hartung about this, author of Profits of War. That's Prophets. He said it's a form of corporate welfare for companies like Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics because it goes to Egypt. Then it comes back for F-16 aircraft, for M1 tanks, for aircraft engines, for all kinds of missiles, for guns, for tear gas canisters from a company called Combined Systems International, which actually has its name on the side of the canisters that have been found on the streets there. Hartung's book, Prophets of War, is subtitled Lockheed Martin and the Making of the Military-Industrial Complex. He went on, Lockheed Martin has been the leader in deals worth close to $4 billion over the last 10 years. General Dynamics, $2.5 billion for tanks, Boeing, $1.7 billion for missiles, for helicopters, Raytheon for all manner of missiles for the armed forces. So basically, this is a key element in propping up the regime. But a lot of money is basically recycled. Taxpayers could just as easily be giving it directly to Lockheed Martin or General Dynamics, he said. Then there's NARIS, a U.S. subsidiary of Boeing that's based in California, which sold Egypt equipment to allow DPI, Deep Packet Inspection. Tim Carr of the media group Free Press explained. He said the NARIS technology allows the Egyptian telecommunications companies to look at texting via cell phones and to identify the sort of dissident voices that are out there. It also gives them the technology to geographically locate them and track them down, arresting them, disappearing them. You know, I think the reason that Mubarak lasted for 30 years can be explained by a warning from a former U.S. Army general who became a president, Republican president, Dwight D. Eisenhower, when he said, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. That deadly complex is not only a danger to democracy at home, but when shoring up despots abroad. We must put democracy over dictators, or else our national security will be deeply threatened. And so we go from the Middle East uprisings to the Midwest. You know, last week, Democracy Now! Broadcast from the Madison Capitol Dome. As many as 100,000 people, one of the largest labor marches in U.S. history, marched to the Wisconsin State Capitol in Madison last Saturday as part of an ongoing protest against the newly elected Republican Governor Scott Walker's attempt to not just badger the state's public employee unions, but to break them. The Madison uprising follows on the heels of those in the Middle East. I met a student there. His name was Zach, and he had just recently returned from Iraq. He had served in the Iraq War. His sign read, I went to Iraq and came home to Egypt. Another sign read, Walker Mubarak of the Midwest. Likewise, a photo has circulated in Madison of a young man at a rally in Cairo with a sign reading, "Egypt supports Wisconsin workers." There's a place there called Ian's Pizza in Madison, and they were taking orders from around the world to send to the protesters in the Madison capital. So they were getting orders from Antarctica, from Iceland, and from Egypt to feed the people in the capital. Actually, this morning, when I was at the Carbondale Town Hall, and I was asking people afterwards, and I was talking to them and signing books, a young woman came up. I said, how did you know about this event? And she said, it's really funny. I just looked down the street, but a friend of mine texted me from Egypt and said, you better get to Carbondale. We live in a globalized world. So, here you have all these signs. Meanwhile, Libyans continue to defy the violent crackdown as they try to oust Muammar Gaddafi. And more than 20,000 people in Columbus, Ohio, rallied against the Republican Governor John Kasich's attempt to pass anti-union legislation there. Just a few weeks ago, solidarity between Egyptian youth and Wisconsin police officers or Libyan workers and Ohio public employees might have elicited a raised eyebrow.
Wow.
Just wanted to get a little water. But let's talk about where it all began in Tunisia, with this 26-year-old young university student, Mohamed Bouazizi, who came out of university, could not find a job, no real opportunity, ends up selling fruit and vegetable in the marketplace with his little scale that he bought, and the authorities confiscate his scale, and they keep on harassing him. And so, he's so deeply, utterly frustrated that he sets himself on fire. He immolates himself. And this is the spark that ignited the Tunisian people. So many identified with his plight. And then that swept through the Middle East, thank you, like wildfire. Egypt, and so on. And there, by the way, was another spark, WikiLeaks.
Oh, yeah.
WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks, first released the Iraq war logs, and then the Afghan war logs, and then the U.S. diplomatic cables. The U.S. media focuses on Julian Assange, who founded WikiLeaks. If he had written the Iraq war logs, or the Afghan war logs, or the U.S. diplomatic cables, it would be extremely relevant who he was, do you trust him, what kind of integrity does he have. But they were not written by him. The Iraq and Afghan war logs, low-level soldiers, generals, people on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, a blow-by-blow description that you usually never see, that the government usually denies. And then the diplomatic cables were amazing, and they continue to come out. Largest trove of U.S. diplomatic cables ever released. But let me go to the Iraq war logs for a second, because they were so important. If only we knew what we know now when all of this was taking place, why it's so important to have an independent media. Let me go to 2007. We had Julian Assange on a number of times on Democracy Now! And hope to continue to. We first had him on last April with the Iraq war logs. Why? Because a video was released of a July 12, 2007 attack. And then in the Iraq war logs, there was a document that was released of an attack in February of 2007. By the way, Dennis is giving out the Daily Digest, which you should sign up for, and then you can get our daily headlines and news alerts. And you can then pass them on to friends. In February of 2007. There's a log about two men under an Apache helicopter gunship. And the gunship's about to attack them, they put up their hands.